This DVD is about intensive interaction. It has been produced in response to the many requests from practitioners in Australia who have either been on a course, who have read a book, or who may have heard about the approach from colleagues, friends, or from the families of learners with severe and profound intellectual disabilities, but want to learn more. We hope that the DVD will assist professional learning in educational as well as in other contexts, but stress that it should not be seen as a definitive resource on the subject. We would recommend that those interested in intensive interaction should also look at Dr. Dave Hewitt's DVD Intensive Interaction for further information. Rather than reinventing the wheel and making another DVD which explains the principles of intensive interaction, this resource is primarily directed at people who have already begun to use the approach. The format of the DVD will take its structure from the Intensive Interaction Reflection Tool, a resource developed by Mark Barber and Janine Williamson. This tool can be used to highlight some of the important elements of intensive interaction that practitioners should bear in mind when they are being good interactive partners. It is hoped that after seeing this DVD, you will be motivated to read widely about the approach. Attend one of the many courses which are provided at Bayside SDS in Melbourne. You might also seek out one of the teacher networks developing in your state. Those interested in finding out more about intensive interaction in UK should contact Dr. Dave Hewitt or log on to www.intensivinteraction.uk, where details of training in the UK are regularly posted. At the end of the DVD, there is a page identifying books published on intensive interaction. Intensive interaction is an approach that anyone can use to help them to share quality time with someone who has difficulty communicating or being social. It is typically used with learners who experience complex or profound intellectual disabilities, which are often augmented by additional sensory or physical conditions, or by what are known as autistic spectrum disorders. Intensive interaction helps people to learn about the very complex rules that people use to interact with each other, and supports the development of understanding about successful and enjoyable communication. As other authors have described, doing intensive interaction involves supporting a learner's involvement in social dialogues by responding to and assimilating their contributions to exchanges, while avoiding the pitfalls of directing or dominating the interaction. The practitioner more or less follows the learner. Their role is to accompany the learner as they explore and gradually begin to recognize and play with aspects of the fundamentals of communication. As Dave Hewitt says, the central principle of intensive interaction is that you allow the person who is learning to more or less lead the activity. As the following vignettes show, it is vital to use behaviours that the learner will recognize as their own to ensure that they are familiar, and even a little intrigued by what they see, hear, or feel that you are doing in response to them. It's also vital to use the speeds, rhythms, and pauses that the learner uses, which indicate their preferred pace. This makes sure that nothing in the interaction happens too quickly, and that the learner stays interested and in control. Whenever possible, our responses should highlight the communicative potential of their behaviour and the fact that you, the communicative partner, are enjoying what is happening. However, when practitioners use these principles, many of them report finding themselves falling into interactions which become dominated by imitation. For some learners, interactions may not appear to get more complicated than increasing familiarity with or joyful recognition of aspects of their own behaviour. Luke here experiences a number of difficulties that result in him being limited to quite a narrow range of voluntary behaviours. He can smile, lip smack and purse his lips, as well as move his head and arms a bit. Luke can vocalise and does so sometimes, especially when he gets excited or recognises something. His teacher Karen has carefully observed him, noting his vocal patterns and breathing noises, as well as other sounds that he makes periodically during the day. She imitates these sounds to intrigue and engage him, and to ensure that the topic of the interaction is always familiar to him. As you can see, she's using his behaviours, the ones he will be familiar with, as the content of a chat, and Luke responds with pleasure and effort, recognising his sounds coming from somewhere else. And as time has progressed, his increased response and occasional distress when an interaction stops, and increasing involvement suggests that he is recognising that when these familiar noises happen, it's because of something to do with what he has just done. Notice how Karen responds. Everything she does is of Luke. His sound is acknowledged as his contribution or turn, and Karen responds back, supporting him in responsive and open-ended dialogue that might last for 2 or 20 minutes, depending on how Luke feels at the time. With other learners, carefully judged imitation by the practitioner can be useful to intrigue or attract the learner's attention to them. Indeed, imitation may become the basis of many interactions, or the beginning of an exploration into communication that involves many developments. Over time, games of imitation and turn-taking can begin to appear repetitive to the practitioner, but that's the point. Learners need lots of repetition to build up their understanding of social situations. The repetitive nature of interactions provides learners with a reliable context within which they can explore the envelope of communication. It also allows space for either purposeful or accidental contributions to be accommodated into the interaction. It is important for the practitioner to be ever watchful for slight changes or novel additions in what appears to be formulaic or predictable imitative games. As the repetitious game format emerges, it often becomes the reliable arena for further exploration to occur. After getting on what we might call Luke's intellectual radar by imitating his bead-playing games and getting progressively closer, Alicia, Luke's teacher, now finds that the established context of imitation playing games is providing a context for something new. As the bead game continues, a new game begins to evolve as a hesitation game emerges. Although the game often appears to repeat itself, we see new interactions or formats evolving within the familiar structure or context of a repetitive imitation game. But while imitation can be a useful and prominent aspect of doing intensive interaction with some learners, it is by no means the defining factor in the approach as it applies to other learners. Indeed, it might only be the beginning. As has been said, this DVD takes its structure from the Intensive Interaction Reflection Tool. Many of the other resources available on intensive interaction discuss the importance of giving good face, following the learner's lead, the use of imitation, and the other elements written in bold black letters on the left-hand side of the reflection tool. We're going to focus on some of the other aspects of the approach shown on the screen in grey. Although the elements shown in black will be occasionally highlighted as they appear in the following sequences, we strongly recommend that you should also get a copy of Dave Hewitt's DVD for more discussion about these important features of intensive interaction. The complex and interacting disabilities experienced by people with profound intellectual disabilities frequently result in them experiencing years of social isolation. This can result in them becoming more focused on internal or sensory events. These sensory events can become very satisfying as they are often much more under the control of the learner than the fast-moving and often confusing demands placed on them when they try to engage the social world, but also because they are pleasant and enjoyable. Claire here has no sight and would spend much of her waking day rubbing her head on her headrest and repeatedly and rhythmically hitting her table. She would persist in this whether someone was nearby or not. It seemed to have nothing to do with external factors and everything to do with what she enjoyed and knew. You could say that in the absence of anything else interesting, it was her default position. After over 12 months of fairly close imitation of Claire's habitual and totally solitary activity of hitting the table, her teacher, Therese, who has worked with her for many months, will move on from imitation in this video. But she is careful to maintain Claire's engagement in the dialogue by echoing Claire's contribution. She is responding to Claire following the speed and tempo of Claire's activity, but Therese's response is given to Claire in another channel. Instead of imitating her hitting the table, Therese is responding using the essence of Claire's chosen activity and answers using touch, which relates closely to the pattern of what Claire is doing. Claire recognizes that the response relates to her, but to use an analogy, it's as though a conversation about cars is exploring Toyotas, Opels and Holdens instead of just focusing on Fords. It's also interesting to listen to the amount of background environmental noise that immerses Claire on a daily basis. It is worth wondering what sense she makes of it all, and indeed whether she can separate the sound of human voices from the other sounds which constantly compete for her attention. doesn't use words, but he enjoys rocking with his back to something firm. He enjoys this activity to the point of focusing on and almost getting lost in the pleasure of the rhythm. Karen, who hasn't known Adam for very long, is using or referring to his rhythm to get on Adam's intellectual radar and to get an invitation to join him socially in his pleasurable activity. In effect, she's trying to build social bridges or trying to find a place to meet, using Adam's interests as the topic of the conversation. Using aspects of his solitary activity to build a context within which and about which both partners can communicate successfully. She is trying echoes of the rhythmic patterns that Adam uses as an enjoyable activity to draw his attention from his solitary activity into social activity, using a recognizable topic of conversation. She is completely responsive, accepting and respectful of his choices. But rather than simply using imitation, she uses her skills to stay within the activity that he has chosen. She uses behaviors he will recognize while also periodically offering closely related variations, or what might be called potential changes of topic. But she remains within the recognizable shape of the contributions Adam can make and explore. He may choose to explore any of these, or not, and Karen follows his choices. What is also interesting is the range of potential new games that he appears interested in, as he engages Karen and influences her responses to his activity.
Doodle day. A day.
Pauses are an important aspect of intensive interaction. It's vital to adopt the learner's cadence of activity and to allow them to pause in their own activity or decide that it's over. However, they're also useful as punctuation marks, or opportunities for the learner to either take a leading turn or to take the interaction in a different direction. Pauses can give drama and excitement to an interaction, or they can be used to offer space for the learner to take or retake control. Therese is working with Brianna in this video, which shows how pauses can be used to put the learner in the driving seat. They've been enjoying a well-known game together for a while, before Therese periodically offers Brianna the option to terminate, change, or continue the game. Brianna can either move away, or she can make it plain that she wants an encounter to continue, and that she wants Therese to focus on her again. As this punctuation mark is repeatedly introduced to other games, it becomes pretty easy to see that turning away can become the basis of a new game in which to explore the variations and avenues that might emerge.
Gotcha! Gotcha!
This game began as the clapping game that Tim invariably opts for. Today, however, we are exploring the envelope of what a clapping game might contain. The following on nature of the game continues, but the actual clapping is disrupted. Tim's sounds are imitated and Mark is careful to get a good height so that he can give good face. But sometimes the hands that Tim expects to clap enclose his rather than clap inside of his as he expects. The game is still recognizable, even if Mark's hands sometimes resist clapping or even miss each other, but Tim attends closely as what he expects to happen doesn't always occur. But when Tim brings the game back to the initial clapping game, Mark follows, so Tim's expectation of control continues to be established.
Stuck. Stuck.
Believing that Tim's attention to the game is waning, Deanne uses a mixture of pausing and sabotage as a punctuation mark or opportunity for Tim to re-establish his involvement or terminate the interaction. Although his teacher began to intrigue Luke's attention by playing next to him with her own set of beads, in this video the actual game begins to alternate as a game about hands slapping the floor emerges, and Luke explores what might happen. Returning frequently to the beads, he recalls her to the hand game, and Alicia immediately uses hesitation and sabotage to open up the interactive possibilities of the situation. If you watch carefully, you'll see Luke periodically glancing over to Alicia to check that she's still playing his game with him. But he repeatedly returns to the hand game, enjoying the social exchange that mark good sabotages and which, one feels, can become the most fun part of being together. His vocalizations are all acknowledged and imitated. Alicia waits for him to take the lead in what happens next, and most importantly, Luke has a successful and hugely enjoyable interaction with a communicative partner rather than a solitary game of beads. Luke later revisited this format or mutually understood game regularly and in many different contexts, making invitations to people to play with him like this. Maybe he was learning that he was enjoying as much success with people as he could with beads. Connor has a particularly consuming and solitary routine in the sensory garden that he enjoys when he can. This particularly long clip shows the progression and slow build-up often needed in an interaction, when gaining someone's recognition and acceptance of the skilled partner's close presence. Mark gradually moves closer to Connor, giving steadily increasing levels of touch and waits for these to be reciprocated. Eventually a game emerges, which Connor is interested and amused by. They're leaning on each other. As the game progresses and Connor continues to demonstrate that he is relaxed and happy about the intrusion into his space and his activity, the opportunity for sabotage presents itself as they repeatedly revisit bumping into each other. Sabotage in this context is simply not bumping into him when he expects the fourth and final bump in a sequence. When the sabotage occurs, the venue of the interaction becomes temporarily unimportant, as Connor's attention is completely and socially focused on sharing his enjoyment of this game with another person.
Cheers, mate. Me 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 Come on. Two, three, boom. One, two, three, boom. One, two, three.
When this video was being taken, Kylie thought she was engaging Luke by imitating him in a turn-taking game, However, in the video it looks as if Luke is giving Kylie a run for her money. He's giving her things to follow, and watching for her response with amusement. While Kylie isn't imitating him, she always responds recognisably. She frequently responds in kind, that is, not exactly the same, but by giving a related physical answer to Luke's action. While this sort of response often encourages the learner to persist in their attempt to get us to get it right, it can often suggest new variants which Luke might feel are worth exploring. Whichever, it's clear that he's enjoying this game and undoubtedly consolidating his learning about what other people do and how he can influence that. In this old clip of Luke, Karen sits with him at his chosen spot and follows the ideas that Luke comes up with for a rhythmic exploration of give and take. Like Kylie, Karen frequently varies her response or adds echoes to her imitation responses, largely to encourage him to take the lead and not just to respond back with imitation of his own. However, at some point, Luke decides to change the topic completely and add a shoe to the mix. Watch how Karen brings the shoe into the interaction without it dominating their activity. This is a great example of how learners sometimes spontaneously try something new out in the security of a known format or established game. So the learning format spirals out and elaborates on itself. Importantly, while the interaction now involves the shoe, the interaction is not centered on or about the shoe. It's still about what Luke wants to communicate. Although Janine doesn't imitate Brianna in this early piece of video, her movements clearly reflect and respond to Brianna's. Janine doesn't initiate touch, but waits for Brianna to reach out. Smiles are returned, and Brianna certainly seems to know that she is involved in a playful dance with Janine, her teacher, who is always available, attentive, and responsive. Watch as when Brianna reaches out to her, Janine places her hand close to Brianna's but then hesitates, giving room for Brianna to take the initiative and close the final gap. While Ella and Deanne have a well-established repertoire of games together, it's useful to watch this final clip to see how well Deanne paces her responses and supports Ella to lead the game. Deanne's posture is incredibly attentive and positive. She gives good face and Ella can be in no doubt where her communicative partner's attention is focused. Ella controls the whole interaction as Deanne remains relaxed and doesn't seem to have any agenda except responding. Responding in a way that highlights the bursting and pausing that structures the exchange. So what's the difference between a sabotage and a pause? When a practitioner uses a pause in an interaction, they simply take a little longer to perform the expected response. This gives the learner the opportunity to take the lead. A pause in an interaction is offered to the learner so that they may begin to explore restarting the conversation by continuing with the established topic. The practitioner responds to this attempt by reflecting or responding to the behavior in a manner which confirms the success of the learner's contribution. The pause can be used as a form of sabotage, as the pause itself isn't expected by the learner, especially in a well-established sequence. It becomes sabotage when the practitioner gently disrupts or veers from what was expected. A sabotage is offered to the learner with the intent of promoting an opportunity for the learner to explore behaviors that make a comment about a noticed yet unanticipated change in the established topic of conversation. Following the learner's comment, the communication partner should return to responding to the learner, acknowledging their contribution even if this is merely a questioning look or stealing. Thus control is handed back to the learner and the conversation's topic is resumed. As the learner progressively learns that their action or comment repairs the disruption in the topic, they will comment with increasing assertiveness. More than simply restarting the established conversation, the sabotage potentially elicits new contributions, topics, or formats. Intensive interaction should be used to support learners to practice and explore communication. We must stress that we are in no way suggesting that these strategies should be inserted into interactions willy-nilly. As practitioners, however, we have found ourselves using these strategies when they have been suggested by what happens during interactions which have become established over months and years. The strategies described are simply the means of handing over control or providing opportunities for learners to explore and rehearse taking control of dialogues. There are no formulas or recommendations for a when or if to use them, or indeed how many of them to use to help an exchange along. Our only recommendation is that practitioners should attend closely and respond fluidly and intuitively during encounters with people who appear to need support to communicate successfully.